Further debunking of the lie that feminism was originally good in the past, that it was well-meaning, that it was for equality. Here is the writer, Mary Shelley. She wrote Frankenstein. Here are her two feminist parents whose attitude towards the genders was, of course, a double standard. Provider roles for men and carte blanche for women. That's what their attitudes was. It's not about equality. Now we'll get into this. We'll start about here.
Frankenstein, we must first look at the world into which Mary Shelley was born. Mary Shelley came from an incredibly intellectual family. Her parents were two of the most radical thinkers of their time.
They were such radical thinkers that no one ever talks about their writings. The only contribution to society these feminist cretins ever made was giving birth to Mary Shelley. Otherwise, they're do-nothings.
And their influence would cast a long shadow over her life. Her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, was a pioneering feminist and author of A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, in which she boldly called for full equality between women and men.
This is, of course, a lie. It's a feminist lie. She does not.
At a time when women were confined to the domestic sphere.
So there you go. This is the front. Women were not confined to the domestic sphere. They wanted it to themselves. Here's proof. Here's a trade that typically men did, blacksmiths. I asked, were there female blacksmiths? And it said, yes, there were. Albeit in limited numbers and often as exceptions to the norm. So, and just like the STEM fields today, right? Nothing's changed. Women could and did become blacksmiths. They involved themselves in trades that were typically male, right? But they were small numbers because they didn't want to. This is what they really wanted. They wanted to be in the home where the workload was less, where it was clean, safe, and less. It's men who are confined to their provider role. This is the guy who has to do all the heavy lifting, and he was confined to it. So these are more lies. Debunked.
Her ideas were revolutionary. She argued that women were not naturally inferior, but were made so by their lack of access to education and independence.
Now here's another thing. We know that that's not true. Women have even more access to education today, and men still outstrip them when it comes to their contributions to society. Women do not have to achieve to be accepted by society. So naturally, they're not going to evolve to be able to compete with men. They don't need to. They never had to.
Wollstonecraft's life was as radical as her ideas. Before meeting William Godwin, she had a daughter from a previous affair with an American adventurer, defying traditional moral codes and cementing her controversial reputation.
Wow, this is really radical. She got impregnated by a guy she found sexy, an adventurer, and then she ran to some male provider, some boring male feminist, to provide for her and her daughter. If she was really radical, she would have become a blacksmith and took care of her daughter on her own, right? No, this is just standard female behavior.
Mary's father, William Godwin,
who is an ugly man, everyone, and he's standard too. He was no exceptional hero looking after her daughter from another man. He saw a young woman who he wanted in his life. He had to offer the bribe of, I'll look after you and your daughter to have you around. And that's what he did. And this is why guys don't come to the comment sections and talk about cocks. Men have not changed one iota from today and the past. We're always the same. Guys make whatever sacrifices they can They have to get the woman into their lives.
Was a philosopher who advocated for individual freedom and believed that society could thrive without oppressive institutions like monarchies or strict class systems.
I don't really believe this guy. These guys are all talk. He looks like he's from the upper class, or at the very least, the upper middle class. He would lose if, if the strata was erased. When it comes to putting your money where their mouth is, these progressives always balk.
Argued that reason and personal responsibility, rather than control from authorities, should guide people's lives, envisioning a more equal and just society. Together, Wollstonecraft and Godwin reshaped the way people thought about progress, freedom, and the role of women in society.
No, they didn't. No one ever talks about what they wrote. It's only their daughter who wrote Frankenstein. These two are do-nothings.
They also held radical views on marriage itself, believing it was a form of legal bondage that restricted personal liberty.
Well, they're lying. Or, if they aren't lying, then they believe it's for men. They actually are right. It does restrict. But they're only talking it for women, right? To get rid of it. But in the end, let's see. We'll see what her father really thought when it came to her man, Percy Shelley, right? Here, here we are. Let me get into this. This is his attitude, his male feminist attitude towards Percy Shelley.
World beyond the iron gates, only the pull of their hearts and the quiet intensity of the moment. But their love carried a scandalous secret. Percy was already married. For all of her father's radical views on freedom and marriage, his disapproval was swift when it came to Mary's affair. It seemed that Godwin's progressive ideas had limits when his own daughter's reputation was on the line.
Limits for men. You see, it's all right for him to marry some woman who has a child out of wedlock. But he's not going to let his daughter shank up with a guy who's already married. Why? Because he wants this man to be a male provider to his daughter. He would want him to divorce and then marry her and then be in this constrictive marriage that he says is so bad. What do I keep telling you? Feminists are tradcons. They're regressive tradcons. And vice versa. Feminism is not about equality. It's not about the good of society. It's about keeping men down and giving women privileges over men. Right here. This is what his attitude. When the rubber hits the road, all these feminists show what feminism is about. Inequality, double standards, traditional roles for men. It happens every time. And if her mother was alive, she'd feel the exact same way. All their progressive ideas die once the woman has to sacrifice. Okay, so this has been debunked again.